I found a hidden room behind my closet. I'd been living in the apartment for about 6 months when I discovered the room. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, completely by accident. I had too many shoes piled in the bottom of my bedroom closet and decided to install an organizer to help keep things neat. Not just drywall on studs hollow but a flat echo, like there was space behind it. As I was measuring the back wall, my knuckles tapped something odd, hollow. I paused, and sure if I'd imagined it, I knocked again, definitely hollow, curious. I ran my fingers along the corner where the closet wall met the back panel. And that's when I felt it, a thin seam, not quite flush. Beside it, a basic surveillance camera connected to a black box, the kind used for recording home security footage. The camera was angled directly toward the false wall I just opened, which meant it had been pointed right at the opening between my bedroom and the closet. The section of the wall came free more easily than I expected. It wasn't secured tightly, just fitted snugly like a false panel. When I pulled, it swung inward on hidden hinges. Behind the panel was a narrow room no more than 4 feet deep, running the length of the closet. I told them I'd found a hidden room. Signs that someone had been staying in it. And a camera pointed into my bedroom, recently, long enough to need water, food, and a place to relieve themselves. 2 officers checked the room. One of them didn't say much, the other kept asking questions. Had I noticed anything strange, heard noises, had anything gone missing? What if this was some sort of misunderstanding? Maybe it had been a storage space, maybe a contractor had used it. I'd occasionally thought I heard movement in the walls. I'd even woken up once thinking I saw my closet door shifting, but I dismissed it. I was trying to convince myself it wasn't as bad as it looked. Whoever had done it had experience. It was powered by a battery pack system tucked behind the shelf, hidden completely from casual view. The last tenant had left abruptly and never responded to follow-up calls. Her number was disconnected. She never returned to claim her deposit. I had to leave the apartment while they processed it. Wondering if I'd ever spoken aloud when I thought I was alone. Wondering if any of those videos were still out there, copied, passed around, hidden on servers I'd never find. The idea that someone had been quietly existing just feet away from me was almost impossible to process. I shine flashlights into vents and count the number of outlets and fixtures. I make sure there are no seams where there shouldn't be any. He wasn't the manager, but his name was on the lease paperwork. According to the police, he'd had duplicate keys and a master code to the maintenance entries. They were still going through its contents, but it appeared that video files had been stored locally, not uploaded. No internet traffic. No light. The air smelled stale, thick, and wrong. I used my phone's flashlight to see inside. A thin, stained mattress lay on the floor. Next to it were 2 empty water bottles, a crumpled protein bar wrapper, and a small plastic bucket in the corner. At the far end, there was a shelf. On it, an old laptop, shut but plugged in. I wasn't the first, but I was the first to report anything. Footage, hard drives, hidden cameras. Prepackaged and ready for installation. His laptop contained logs, times, names, dates. There were over a dozen entries linked to previous tenants. Right at my bed, my skin went cold. I stumbled back, heart racing. Someone had been living here, not years ago. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. But the camera erased any doubt. I called 911. Tried to sound calm, but I think my voice was shaking. They arrived within 20 minutes. Yes, I told them. They bagged the camera and the laptop. I was asked not to touch anything else. A forensics team arrived later that evening. When I spoke with the lead investigator 2 days later, he told me the laptop had been used recently. The camera system had been installed independently of the building's electrical grid. It wasn't a network. It wasn't some secret ring of watchers. It was just one person. The building owner, a man named Carl Jenkins, had inherited the property from his father 2 years earlier. They suspected he'd been using these hidden spaces to spy on tenants, only female tenants, always in corner units with large bedroom closets. When they arrested him, they found additional equipment in his home. The reason I'd been able to rent the place so cheap. I moved out that same week. The worst part wasn't the discovery. It was what came after. Wondering how many nights someone had watched me sleep. There were no supernatural elements. No ghosts. No evil presence. Just a man who figured out how to hide in plain sight, quietly erasing people's privacy for his own twisted satisfaction. Now, in every new place I live, I check the closets. I knock on the walls. And when I sleep, I always make sure the closet door is shut. I wasn't the only one with a key. I moved into the apartment in late spring. It was a decent one-bedroom unit in a quiet building, not too old, not too new. Nothing special, but it suited me. I'd been working long hours at a new consulting job, sometimes pulling 70-hour weeks, so all I needed was a place to sleep, eat, and try to unwind. The first few weeks passed without incident. Then I started noticing small things out of place. The TV remote on the kitchen counter instead of the coffee table. My toothbrush shifted slightly in its holder. I figured it was stress or sleep deprivation. Barely had time to cook or clean, so it made sense my brain wasn't tracking the details. At first, it was easy to dismiss, a cup not where I thought I left it, but then it got harder to ignore. But things were changing subtly while I was gone or while I was sleeping. I'd buy groceries on Sunday and by Tuesday things would already be missing, nothing major. Just small amounts, yogurt gone. He was polite but dismissive, said maybe a cleaning crew had entered by mistake. I hadn't hired one. He claimed no one else had a key. Only you, he said. And maybe emergency access if something serious happened. I never left it there. It was warm. Like someone had been using it recently. The browser history showed searches I didn't make, guides about lock picking, camera installation, even articles about apartment surveillance. I installed it above the front door to monitor the entryway. It recorded motion-triggered clips too. A memory card I could review daily. Half a sandwich I swore I hadn't eaten. A new jar of peanut butter already open and used. I asked my sister if I might be sleep eating. After a week, the truth was undeniable. She laughed but suggested I might be more tired than I realized. Still, something felt off. I started documenting everything: photos of my fridge, the contents of my drawers, even the angle of items on my shelves. Then walked around the living room, picked up a book from my shelf, read a page, and set it back down. But when I zoomed in, I realized it was the same guy I'd seen months ago when I first moved in during maintenance work. My landlord had introduced him briefly as his nephew or something. Helps with odd jobs around the building, he'd said. He even adjusted one of the pillows on the couch before walking back to the door and locking it behind him as he left. He didn't break anything. His defense was simple: he liked the feeling of being in someone else's world. That's what he told the detective. He claimed he never did anything wrong. Just observed. Ate some food. Watched TV. Looked through bookshelves. Sat quietly in the homes of people who didn't know he was there. Someone was coming into my apartment. Blamed the previous building manager for not updating the locks. No force. No sound. Keep cameras in every room. I never assume I'm alone, not really. Just a key turning smoothly in the lock. There were no signs of forced entry. The windows were secure. The door always locked when I got home. He wasn't afraid of being caught. He walked straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out a soda and a container of leftovers. He sat at the kitchen table, ate casually. Like he'd done it many times before. I called the building manager. That didn't sit right with me. In his apartment, they found labeled keys to multiple units in the building. Journals with notes on tenant routines when people came home, when they left, which units were unoccupied during the day. A disturbing level of detail. I hired a locksmith the next day and had the lock replaced entirely. A higher-grade deadbolt. Just in case, I didn't tell the landlord. I figured if something was really going on, changing the lock would stop it. For 3 nights, everything stayed the same. Then, one morning, I woke to find my laptop open on the couch. I called the police. They came out, took a report, but without signs of entry or stolen property, there wasn't much they could do. So, I bought a hidden camera. Just one, disguised as a smoke detector. The first 2 nights, nothing. On the third night, I got my answer. At 3:12 a.m., the door opened. A man entered, quietly, confidently. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't fumble. He was in my apartment for almost 25 minutes. He cleaned up after himself. I didn't recognize him at first. Apparently, he helped himself to more than that. I gave the footage to the police. This time, they acted immediately. They arrested him the next day. He hadn't stolen anything, at least not that they could prove. The landlord claimed he had no idea. Denied giving him keys. I moved out 2 days later. Even now, months later, I still feel uneasy in unfamiliar spaces. I check every door twice. Because the scariest part wasn't that someone came in. It's that he made himself comfortable. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't stealing. To him, my home wasn't mine. It was his second home. The previous tenant never really left. My name is Adam Parker. I moved into Unit 3F of the Fairview Apartments last April. It was just a small 1-bedroom in an old building downtown, nothing special. The paint was chipped in a few corners, the floor creaked when you walked too fast. By the end of the second week, I had a growing pile. He was in his 60s and moved slow, like every step annoyed him. He said Sarah was the previous tenant, had lived there a few years, and moved out maybe a couple of months before I came in. Just write not at this address and leave him in the box downstairs, he told me. It'll stop eventually. Bills. Insurance forms. A card that said happy birthday in glitter pen. I'm looking for Sarah, she said. When I told her I'd just moved in, her face went blank. No, she said softly, this is her place. Then she turned around and stood in the hallway for a long minute before walking away without knocking on any other doors. One envelope had no return address and looked like a personal letter. Another was a pharmacy slip. For a prescription refill, like mildew or something spoiled buried deep in the walls. I scrubbed every inch of the apartment, ran fans, sprayed air freshener. The smell kept coming back. A man in hospital scrubs said he was a coworker. When I stepped on them, they gave a little, like they were sitting on something soft. I figured it was water damage that had been patched badly. He said she probably moved out in February, but couldn't remember the exact date. I asked why her mail from last week still had this address. He shrugged. People forget to change things. A sharply dressed woman said she'd rented Sarah her last place. One guy didn't say a word. Just looked confused and left after staring at the door. A coffee ring on the kitchen counter that hadn't been there the day before. I explained everything, the calls, the mail, the people showing up, and my gut feeling that something wasn't right. They sent a plainclothes officer the next day. Tiny scuffs near the door that didn't match the wear of someone just moving out, the police said. It looked like he'd tried to hide her quietly and rent the place out before anyone noticed. He never expected the mail, the calls, the people who cared about her to keep following up. All addressed to her. None of it stopped. But the rent was low, and I needed a fresh start after a bad breakup. Mind if we come back tomorrow with some equipment? He asked. I figured I'd stay 6 months, maybe a year, until I got my life back together. Under the boards was a layer of cement, uneven and still lighter than the rest of the foundation. Beneath it was what was left of Sarah Whitmore. Something about that line bothered me. Why wouldn't it be forwarded if she had moved? When I looked into the building registry, I saw no official lease termination for Unit 3F, just a quiet transfer of occupancy. I send back what I can, and for the rest, I mark them return to sender. I started writing a note inside the envelope when I return it. 3 days after I moved in, a letter showed up in my mailbox. It was addressed to someone named Sarah Whitmore. The phone rang within hours. I answered, expecting a spam call, but instead a woman asked, "Is Sarah there?" She was always still there. I dream about someone knocking at the door over and over, or standing in the dark hallway feeling like someone was watching me. Once, I dreamed I opened the closet and felt sure someone had just been in it even though it was empty. Her voice was calm, but a little tense, like she was worried. I explained Sarah didn't live there. She paused and said, "She'll come back," then hung up. I didn't think much of it. People forget to change their address all the time. All for Sarah. Different voices, different times. One caller said, "Let her know I called." Another just hung up after a few seconds of silence. I left the envelope on the counter and told myself I'd mark it return to sender later. But the letters kept coming. I asked the building manager, Dennis, about it. It didn't. If anything, it got worse. I hadn't even plugged in the landline that came with the internet package, but one night, out of curiosity, I set it up. Over the next week, more calls came. The worst part wasn't the mail or the phone. It was the people who came to the door. The first visitor was a woman in her 40s. She held a grocery bag and looked tired, like she hadn't slept much. Others followed. They all seemed to share one belief: Sarah hadn't just moved out. Something was off. I started to feel it too. There was a sour smell that filled the place if I left the windows closed too long. It wasn't strong, just faint and unpleasant. The corner of the living room floor felt strange. It wasn't loose, but the boards were slightly bowed. By the fourth week, my sleep was getting worse. I had vivid dreams, not scary, just deeply uncomfortable. One morning, while going through the mail again, I noticed a hospital envelope marked "Last known address do not forward." I started looking things up. I checked public records, news stories, obituaries. Nothing on Sarah Whitmore. No missing persons report, no relocation. I brought it up again with Dennis. This time, his answers were less clear. It felt like he was hiding something. More small things started bothering me. A faint perfume scent in the bedroom closet. I finally called the non-emergency police line. He walked through the place with me and paid close attention to the soft spot on the living room floor. He tapped it gently, then sniffed the air. They came back with ground-penetrating gear. A few hours later, they started tearing up the floor. Turns out Dennis never filed an eviction. Sarah had refused to leave after he told her rent would increase for upcoming renovations. He lost his temper. I moved out within 2 weeks. I still get mail for her sometimes. She didn't leave. She was murdered, because the truth is, she never really left.